Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Leah Toms from the marketing team, and I'd like to welcome you to our Q1 Pulse webinar. We've got a countdown to 199-day TLS certificates, an update on 459-day code signing certificates, details around DNSSEC, an MPIC expansion update, and where we are with the proposal to deprecate manual DCV methods. For our session, we have Callan and Nick France here for you today. As always, the presentation is being recorded and we'll share it with you afterwards. And finally, if you have any questions during the presentation, send them our way. Please use the chat function and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. Tim and Nick, over to you.
Thank you, Leah, and good day, Nick.
Hey Tim, how are you?
I have a little bit of an ear, nose, throat infection, so my voice
Sorry
is
to
a
hear
little
that.
froggy. I hope that's okay, but I think we can probably get through the next hour. We do have a
I
lot
hope
to
so.
talk about, though, so we need to go, 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 because there's a lot going on in the world of PKI, in the world of web PKI right now.
Yes,
Um,
there is.
so the first one, big day, March 15. Nick, what happens on March 15?
March 15th is finally, after many years of debate and discussion, we are finally at the first step down for shortening the lifetime of TLS or server certificates or SSL certificates. So on a web server or for your server that is longer than 199 days. So we are finally at the first step down to shorter lifetime certificates. And we feel like we've been talking about it for quite a few years
We
because we have,
do.
Tim.
We
But here we
do.
are. The
And here
first
we
date
are.
is very
Abs
imminent.
Absolutely. So quickly, because we have covered this a lot, but we do have a lot of listeners on this webinar today. Why are we doing this?
Yeah, we'll run through it fairly quickly, I think. But the honest and the short answer is what it says here on the slide, which is they're safer. Shorter is generally better, right? So the whole point here is, and if we go on to the next slide, it does make us safer, right? The main reason for this is shorter is better. If a certificate is out there and there is something wrong with it, it is compromised, it has incorrect information, or there is something that is causing that certificate to be abused, the shorter that certificate is available to do that abuse with, the better. So if you misissue or you abuse a 10-year certificate, that's potentially 10 years of that
Right.
certificate being in the wrong person's hands. If it's 10 days, that's an exponentially shorter and safer amount of time and less people that are going to suffer damage as a result. So the primary thing is it's stronger, it's safer, it's more secure because shorter is better. We, of
Yeah.
course, have this litany of other good reasons why to do it that we can run through very quickly. It helps us cycle through cryptographic standards quicker. It means that if we need to make key sizes bigger or change algorithms, we only have to
Yeah.
wait
We're not sitting
199
around for
days.
a year before it
Exactly.
actually starts to matter. Yes,
We're,
correct.
we're just doing this quicker than we always have. And we've seen that be a problem in the past. So that's a really good thing for us to gain. Obviously, operational efficiency, automation is better. We automate everything in IT nowadays. We automate builds of software. We automate desktop and laptop build outs and all this kind of stuff. It just makes things easier and better to have all this stuff freed up and automated and freed up for people to do other more productive, more useful things. It makes us really flexible as well and agile. We can deal with changes much more easily. And it's not just changes to standards. It's, say we have to encode certificates a different way or include different information. We don't
Yeah.
have to wait 10 years for those changes. We can get them done
Or
in a number of days.
or very controversial paper came out within the last week or so where somebody claims to have used an AI to, greatly weaken ECC by using AI-enabled attacks. And, if that kind of thing comes along, we may all be adjusting ourselves very quickly. And if
Yep.
there's old certs sitting out in the market, they just sit there and be vulnerable.
Exactly. Well, we've
Yeah.
got one of the things that we do talk about, we haven't put directly on here, but in terms of agility and flexibility, is the quantum issue as well, right?
Yeah.
As you
Yeah.
as you suggested, Tim, there's going to be a computer that comes out at some point which is going to break a lot of the encryption or all of the encryption we rely on. If that thing's out there for years, that's years and years of problem. If it's out there for 46 days or 10 days or whatever
Uh-huh.
we end up going down to, that's a much safer space for all of us. So there's a lot of good reasons why we're doing this, but after many years of debate and discussion, we are finally here in just a few weeks now.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the step on this multi-step step down as we see here. But I'm just gonna say we see a lot in the media about 200 days. And in fact, even on our slide in one of these bits, we say 200 days. But you talked about 199 days. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, so the actual guidelines that we have to adhere to for this and this step down, as you've shown in the slide here, Tim, it does say 200 days is the maximum, right? And
Right.
as we've seen in our industry before, there's been issues where even if you go 1 second over,
Yeah.
those certificates have to be revoked, right? Those certificates have to be
Right.
cancelled, and you have a whole problem on your hands. So
And
most,
the
if not all,
trouble is
CAs.
the infrastructure of the web PKI measures in increments of a day. It goes midnight to midnight. And so if you incorporate both of those midnights,
Mhm.
that is 1 second more than the number of days,
Exactly. So you
right?
could just go over. So I think what us and what almost all CAs, public CAs that issue these things are doing is going to 200 days, to 199 days, sorry, when
Yeah,
the limit's
right.
200. We have 398 here, and 398 is the
Mm.
current maximum. I think we and all other CAs, if they issue a maximum duration cert, it's
Yeah, we
397
cap it at
days.
397 right now. Yes,
Yeah.
200, 100 will be capped at 99, 47 will be capped at
That's a
46.
46. Yeah.
Yep,
And it's a good one
yep.
to note, Tim. Yeah, because people will do see that slight kind of difference and discrepancy. I would say the 200 day sounds a bit snappier, and that's what we've been
Uh,
talking about for a long time.
yeah.
It's just the reality happens to be 1 day less.
And in terms of nomenclature, another one of the things that we talk a lot about, I talk about a lot, just like we talked about 1 year cert, not 398 days. I think you're gonna hear us talking about 6 month certs, 3 month certs,
So
and 1 month certs, because
exactly. Yeah.
that's really the cadence that these things should be on.
Yes, and I think it just goes to show that we as humans, we like kind of round numbers. We like numbers
Right.
and times we can think about. 199 days doesn't mean a lot to many people, me included, having been dealt with this for a long time. But if you say 6 months, it
Yeah.
feels more tangible, right? So six
Right.
months, 3 months, 1 month. And also they're the kind of cadences we should be doing a lot of this stuff on as well, right? We should be doing things and validating domains, as we'll talk about, and reinstalling us. We should be doing them on that level of frequency and not thinking about these as too long a time periods and hundreds of days.
So Sectigo did some primary research over the summer where we looked into organizations' preparedness for this. This was very recent after the forum ballot was passed, and the conclusion we came to is that there's a big gap. There's a big readiness gap between where companies are today, where enterprises are, and where they really need to be. So look at this slide, for example. If we take the what percentage of organizations consider themselves to be very prepared, it is a mere 19%, less than one-fifth, with the bulk of them saying either somewhat or not very prepared, and a little bit saying not in any way. So, that was at this stage now 7 months ago. But that's a lot of gap to make up in the last 7 months. So I think I'm anticipating that there are a lot of people who are going to be not really where they'd like to be
Yeah.
when March 15 rolls around in terms of automation and general preparedness.
Yes. I think one of the things you've talked about though, Tim, and you've
Mhm.
said before when we look at this is, this date in a few weeks is not like the hard fail date. Things aren't going to break
Yeah,
on that day. That's just the date at which you can no longer stick to your annual
yeah,
cadence and get your 1 year certificate. So
right.
yes, people are obviously going to have a lot of problems, as we're seeing. There's a high percentage of people that weren't prepared for this several months ago, and I doubt these statistics have gone down by a whole lot if we were to repoll everyone today. But
Yeah,
that doesn't mean they only have
yeah.
15 or so days to fix this problem. They have a little bit longer than that.
And I do expect we'll probably see Omdia do another annual follow-up to this, and we'll probably have some results in a few months, right? So
Yeah.
so that'll be interesting to check how that's going. Um, and you mentioned post-quantum cryptography. The other interesting point in the shortening certificate lifespan and PQC is that there's a huge amount of overlap between them, right?
Yep.
If you have to automate your certs, you have to get them under control and you know what they are. And if you have to make sure that all of your certificates are using PQC algorithms, you have to get them under control and know what they are. So the task is basically the same. And one of the things we encourage people to do is think of it as two very important initiatives with a huge amount of overlap. and try to approach it that way. Do work once, not twice. Make investments once, not twice. Make plans once, not twice. And the degree you do that, you're going to find that the work you do to get ready for shortening certificate lifespans is going to pay dividends later on when you don't have to do it again.
Absolutely. I think it's really good that people are obviously identifying that. I know we've
Yeah.
spoke about it before. I know we've marketed and talked about it before, but it's good that people are actually recognizing that these are essentially one and the same thing. And it's good. It's like we talked about, not just post-quantum, it's agility and flexibility. It all amounts fundamentally to the same thing. And it is positive, at least in this one, that people are seeing that and seeing that it is the same thing.
Yeah, agreed. So you talked about not being entirely ready, but that's okay, right? And I think probably the important takeaway here is to say, look, March 15th is going to roll around. And if you don't have everything 100% automated, what's happening is your manual renewal cadence has doubled. So if 50% of what you have has been automated, your workload doesn't change, right?
Yep.
If more than 50% of what you have has been automated, your workload goes down. So that's actually, I think, a good way to think about it. And your risk of outage, right? Not just your workload. And so what we encourage people, because we've heard a lot of feedback from a lot of enterprises saying, look, I can't be ready to have everything automated by March 15th. And we've said, okay, well, what can you have? How much can you get automated? Okay, get that done, right? And in particular, even with March 15 coming up, don't take your foot off the gas. If you're looking around saying, I'm not ready to have everything automated by that date, okay, well, can you roll out automation in various tranches of your certs in April or in June or in August? Okay, well, do it then, right? And that can still save your bacon from having a big problem where you can't keep up with the renewals and you have outages and other problems.
Exactly. I think one of the things I say when we talk about this a lot, Tim, is don't let perfect be the enemy of good, right?
Yeah.
I mean, don't aim to do. It'd be nice if everybody could automate to 100%. Whether that's realistic for most organizations, I highly doubt it. But that shouldn't stop you from looking, like you said, look at the low hanging fruit. Look at the stuff where you already have an automation option, you just need to turn it on. Or look
Yeah.
at the stuff where there are really good options like Hackney and all these other things. And then the more complicated stuff you have time to focus on because you've got the majority of the low hanging fruit already sorted. But don't aim for 100% and then feel like you've fallen short. Just try and get as much as you can done. Do the easy stuff first and then focus on the things that may be a bit harder. And one final point I will mention on this, as I always do when we get to these kind of slides, is there may be a chance here to evaluate whether you actually need a publicly trusted website certificate for a particular service or server. If you sat there thinking, well, I've got these servers that I'm never going to be able to automate, they're not connected to the internet, they don't do this. Ask yourself, does that system really need the same certificate as you would put on, a blog review in local cafes? It probably doesn't. And that evaluation can be done now. It may not have been done in the past because it just worked and you did it once every 3 years and it didn't matter. Now might be the time to reevaluate that. So don't be afraid to have a look at that and decide whether a publicly trusted certificate is in fact the right solution to the problem that you have.
Absolutely agreed. But TLS certificates are not the only thing that are having a reduction in term. Code signing is going down to 15 months. And a similar thing, the ballot says maximum of 460 days. Because of the 1 second problem, that turns out to be 359 days. This one goes into effect very soon, March 1, 2026. So why are we doing this, Nick?
Yeah, it's the same answer as before, really. It's
right.
Shorter is better. I mean, I think the one thing to understand about the code signing ecosystem is it's largely down to one consumer, if you like, which is Microsoft. Code signing certificates issued by publicly trusted
It's Windows.
really
That's
for
it.
Windows. Exactly. And obviously they have an awful lot of data and telemetry on attacks and malware and all the bad stuff that more than anybody else has. And they see that these kind of attacks come from longer certificate lifetimes, having those certificates out there for longer. And I think also another change that we saw more recently with code signing that we've added to this as well is the requirement for hardware, for the keys. And that was another issue that Microsoft identified because it is largely their ecosystem. And they've said, we need to fix this. So they have agreed The code signing certificate needs to be shorter. It's going to be safer. And it is going to encourage these other things. It's going to reduce the risk from the compromised keys because now we've got them in hardware, but we need to make sure they stay in hardware. So let's cycle through the old certs. It's going to encourage people to rotate these keys more often as well. So, it's kind of forced to do that, which is forcing people to look at more automated systems, CI/CD, automated build systems, signing solutions and cloud services and all the rest of it. But I think the final point is what we've already said. It aligns with broader industry trends. Lifetimes are going down because it is safer for all of us. So it's definitely something that is that people perhaps aren't aware as much with code signing because the volume of code signing to TLS and other cert types tends to be quite a significant ratio of not very many to lots of other types. But it's still something people need to know and prepare for so they can get ready for this one.
And I think the good news with code signing is going down to renewal every 15 months is a horse of a different color from going down to every 6 months or 3 months or 1 month. So the stress that we feel over the TLS is going to be much less with the code signing. Also, the number of certs we have is much less. And so when you put those two things in combination, I do think this isn't nearly as anxiety creating as the TLS reduction. But by the same line of reasoning, you don't want to be caught on your back foot. You don't want to suddenly realize that your code signing cert has expired and you want to sign this code and you can't. Yep. Especially considering that if you're not prepared to do an automatic key attestation based download with the appropriate hardware on your end, then you literally have to wait for a token to come to you in the mail.
Yes.
And so for these reasons, the biggest thing here is stay on top of your code signing certs, plan ahead. I think in the era of 3-year code signing certs, it was easy for us to just kind of forget about them. And now, 15 months, that sounds to me like an annual renewal cycle with 3 months worth of wiggle room. And that's what I would suggest.
I think you make a good point, Tim. Yeah, with this, the extra period for waiting. Now, obviously, code signing certs aren't as immediately damaging, I would argue, as a TLS certificate, right? So let's just be clear. If you don't have if you have an expired certificate on your website is basically inaccessible. If your code signing cert expires, you can't sign any new code, but it isn't going to break your existing code.
Right.
And, there are certainly a lot of organizations.
But if you're there and you're gearing up and you want to push this thing and you realize you can't sign it, you can't push this thing. So just don't get yourself in that situation.
Exactly. And because of this hardware requirement I mentioned before and what you just said, Tim, if you don't have a suitable kind of HSM or a suitable cloud key storage mechanism that can prove it exists through key attestation, then you are going to be waiting for your CA to physically ship you a token with the key and the certificate on it. And, that can come from wherever the CA is based.
Yeah,
it's not going to be overnight, and subject to import and customs and shipping and all the rest of those fun things that happen when you deal with physical real world objects and not digital certificates. You do have to factor that in. You're absolutely right, Tim. So it is important to know that this is something that's going to take you down to an annual cadence. It's 459 days. So it's, a little bit over a year, but that gives you the extra time to prepare and get these things ready and shipped and where they need to be.
Just pick a time of year and do it once a year. Yeah.
Solid piece of advice.
Yeah. All right. Also, this month or next month, we have changes coming to DNSSEC. So what's going on here, Nick?
Yeah. So DNSSEC is a thing for the digital signing and security of DNS records. Won't go into all the details of how it works or whether it's actually a great thing or not, but it is a thing that exists. And it means that you as the domain owner can sign your DNS records to essentially prove their validity. Now, when we as a CA are issuing certificates, one of the things we have to do is verify that whoever is requesting this certificate actually controls the domain names we are going to put in the certificate. If I want a certificate for nickfrance.com, I've got to prove I can control it. And this is the DCV process, domain control validation, that we've talked about before. There are other checks as well, as it says on the slide, something called CAA, or Certificate Authority Authorization. It's basically another DNS check to say, I've okayed that this domain is controlled by this person. Do they actually approve me as a CA to issue it? So you have the ability to say, I only want Sectigo to issue, or I only want another CA to issue. Now, when we do those checks, what we're going to have to do is completely and fully verify that DNSSEC is valid and all of the records are correctly signed for these DNS lookups when we make them, if DNSSEC is assigned or is set up and configured on your zone, as it were, your domain name.
Yeah.
So it's basically, we are having to hard enforce the requirement for DNSSEC to properly verify if you have it turned on for your domain.
Yeah. Now, what's not changing is you don't have to use DNSSEC. If you're not using DNSSEC, that's perfectly fine. The CA can continue. There's nothing obligating you to enable it if you don't have it. And this is a very important point. We don't want people out there thinking, I have to turn on DNSSEC, especially since a misconfigured DNSSEC can actually prevent issuance. So if you have any doubts about whether or not your DNSSEC is correct, you're actually better off not having it.
Yeah. One of the things we see very frequently, and I'll say this from our support queues and the problems that we see, is people have DNSSEC. But when we do these CAA lookups just before we're allowed to issue a certificate, the customer might not have a CAA record, and that is absolutely fine. You do not have to have one. But if you have DNSSEC turned on and you don't have a CAA record, DNSSEC has to be correctly configured to provide a signed response to say there is no CAA record, right? So it's something called an NSEC3 record, which is a way of saying there is nothing here, and I can prove there's nothing here. The problem is that seems to be misconfigured an awful lot of time. I will say DNSSEC in of itself, there are providers that will kind of do this very invisibly for you. But if you are managing it yourself or you make some configuration issues, it's one of those things that can be very, very complicated and hard to get right. And when it breaks, I know we sometimes have that slide, Tim, that you and I do in a deck about outages caused by certificate expiry.
Right. I don't think we have that one today, but yeah.
If we were a DNS focused company, you would see an awful lot of that for DNSSEC. Right, there have been a lot of services and systems that have gone down internet-wide because DNSSEC was misconfigured. And it means that we can't issue a certificate. So you're going to be in a position where you need a certificate, and if your DNSSEC is set up but not configured correctly, we will not be able to issue you a certificate. So you definitely need to make sure that if you use DNSSEC and you have it on your zone, check it's configured properly, right?
And to clarify, Nick,
yes,
this isn't just when DCV is conducted. Although it can block DCV, every single time we issue a public TLS certificate, we must check the CAA record. So in the event that there is a DNSSEC misconfiguration, we will not be able to issue new certificates regardless of your domain control validation recency.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
It's something we have to check basically every time we issue a certificate, right? So you say it is absolutely critical that this gets right. And the reason, because we've now got the requirement to actually verify and actually ensure and hard fail if this thing doesn't work, you could be in a position whereby you have DNSSEC turned on, you're not aware that it's properly configured or improperly configured, your certificates are not going to issue from a public CA. Yep. So it is kind of imperative, if you are one of the few that have DNSSEC turned on, have it enabled, check with your DNS teams, check with your DNS providers, and make sure it is correctly configured. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get your certificates, which, as we talked about before, on a more frequent cadence and with automation, got to make sure you've got stuff set up to alert you if there's a problem. And this is one of those problems you want to be alerted about.
Yep. But that's not the only thing that's going on with DNS. Or with DCV. So in addition, we're expanding MPIC. So what's MPIC, Nick?
MPIC is the wonderful acronym that stands for Multi-Perspective Issuance Corroboration.
Corroboration. Say that fast 10 times. Yeah.
I will not.
We're all good. We've all gotten very good at saying corroboration. When this first came out, everybody was tripping over it, but we say it so much that now it just rolls off the tongue. But go ahead, proceed.
So it's one of those things that it's another security update, basically. It's designed to prevent, or at least guard against, certain types of internet attacks called BGP attacks. What does that mean? So when we're doing these checks that we've talked about, the domain control validation, DCV, and the certification authority authorization, the CAA checks, we're doing DNS lookups over the internet. And there are certain type of attacks that can be used to effectively defraud us as a CA. They can give us false responses, so we issue certificates incorrectly. And this is a thing that has happened. These kind of attacks have happened in the wild, not necessarily targeted at CAs, but they are a fundamental problem to the operation of the internet.
This is foundational to the architecture of the internet in a very basic way. It's not a thing that a CA can just make himself invulnerable to, except through the MPIC methodology. So what's that?
So the idea is, if there's an attack that can effectively, lie to our perspective, lie to a CA when we are doing a lookup and falsify that lookup that we do.
Right.
If we were to gather multiple perspectives and do that lookup from multiple places and then check they all agree, we would have a good
get
answer.
all of them. Right. It's like the way you do a BGP attack is you kind of shout real loud of who you are, and you shout so loud that you drown out the proper mechanisms. I know that's horrible oversimplification, but the point is, if I'm shouting really loud here where I live, then no one is going to hear me on another continent or on the other side of the world. So by putting these multiple perspectives in place and scattering them both in terms of the network architecture and just geographically, it really becomes not possible for anyone to shout loud enough to trick all of them.
Exactly. It's a good analogy, actually, Tim. I like it. That's fundamentally the point here.
I'm all about the analogies.
We're going to do these checks for a bunch of different places and make sure they all agree. That's what it is. We're checking them from multiple network perspectives and getting them to all corroborate before we issue a certificate. Now, we've actually been doing this for some time, right, Tim?
Yep.
This isn't brand new tomorrow or today. This is something we've been doing for a little while. Rolled out last year. All CAs do it. We've all been keeping an eye on it, looking at our logs. Obviously, there's been some customers where it's been impactful because they decided to make their DNS only work from certain parts of the world and other things like that are probably a bad idea. But there are some changes coming to it. This is what we're talking about, really. So we are going to start requiring it for SMIME as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So it's going to be something that we do for SMIME certificates and not just TLS certificates. And we are also going to start checking from different perspectives, or more perspectives as well. So this is a table that has some requirements for how many different perspectives we use. Now, your CA can do more than this. This is a minimum number of places they can check from, right? And that is just 2 today, but you can go more. But you can see the dates when we get to March 15th again. And this is another March date, but it's a very internal one to CAs, is we have to check from 3 perspectives. And then later in the year 4, and then later in the year again 5. So we're just basically increasing the number of places we do these checks from to make this whole process safer and make it harder for an attacker to hijack the connections between the CA and the DNS lookups to make sure that we're issuing these things properly. Now, why does this matter to you, though, Tim? I think it's a good question to ask why it might matter to our audience. And I think it's one of those changes that, in the main, isn't going to affect the vast majority of customers. Again, we've been doing it for a lot of last year. All CAs have. It isn't necessarily super impactful. However, there are some subscribers, some customers who might do weird things with their DNS where this causes problems.
Like geofencing access to your site, for instance.
Exactly, which is a fine tactic. If that's what you want to do, that's okay. But if you are requesting a certificate that is going to be trusted the world over, which is what a certificate from Sectigo or any other public CA would do, you need to make sure that we can verify control of your domain from any part of the world as well. You can't just say, I'm only in this territory.
But that's okay, Nick, because I can just use manual DCV methods, right?
Well, as it happens,
let's
Tim,
go to the next slide.
Not much longer. Not much longer.
Yeah.
So we're finally in a place where there are some methods of manual DCV that are going to be deprecated. So what do we mean by manual DCV? Well, the stuff we've talked about with DCV so far and the things we talked about earlier when we talked about shortening lifetimes of certificates is automatable. Doing DCV through the different methods DNS based or HTTP based, they can be automated. They should be automated, but they can be automated very easily. You can have a system and a tool that will create you DNS records automatically, and then put them in place, and your CA can verify them. There are, of course, in the baseline requirements for issuance of certificates, there are lots of old legacy, perhaps manual methods whereby things can be sent. And you've got some examples here. Email is one. I mean, it's a very manual method. Get an email sent, click a link in the email, wait, and you get your certificate back. Phone. Using a phone number to verify control of a domain name is kind of crazy when you think about it. Not perhaps as crazy as a fax, or postal mail.
Not so crazy back in 1995. So if you look at these real old things, SMX, fax, postal mail, I always laugh about fax, postal mail. I can't send a fax. I don't own a fax machine. Do you own a fax machine, Nick? If you had to send a fax from your home now, could you? No, right?
Well, there's online fax services, but no.
Postal mail, I recently had a problem where for some weird reason I had to actually send some physical mail, and I had to drive down to the post office and pay them to indicia my envelope because I don't own stamps. So these are very antiquated. But if you think about the fact these methods of DCV came in the 90s, and in the 90s they don't seem so crazy, but nowadays they are. And so we're cleaning this stuff up, and we should, and we're getting rid of it. Now it happens for Sectigo customers, this first batch, the phone, SMS, fax deprecation, we didn't allow those anyway. So you can't do DCV through postal mail today anyway, or through a phone call anyway. But the March 2028 date, the email deprecation, that is something that we still do allow, and we still do have customers who use it. So you guys have some time. You have 2 years, but you have 2 years to completely get off that method because that is going away.
Yeah, and I think that's a big one too. I think, again, that's another one of these changes that people maybe haven't noticed about. And this is only just starting to come. We should be clear here that this is still a proposal, right, Tim? But
no, I'm sorry. This is an old slide. Shame on me. I neglected to update my slide. This is a past ballot. This is a rule. I'm operating off an old slide. Thank you for pointing that out. I'll fix that.
So email DCV is effectively going away. And you're right, 2 years, but that's, with all the other changes we talked about in this deck and with all the other changes that are going on, this is something that might otherwise get buried in the list of things to do. And is an important one, because we do know that there are still a lot of people. I don't have the percentages to hand, although that's something maybe we can get for the next webinar, Tim, and give an idea of how many people still use email DCV. Now, we saw, I think it was last year, right? We saw Whois-based email DCV go away. So you can no longer do a Whois lookup for timcallan.com, find an email address and send an email there. And that's kind of fine because it was lesser used and it was problematic because Whois was disappearing anyway. Yeah. But we're now at a point where regular email validation, and this is either what we call constructed or email to these other DNS contacts. Just to explain those quickly, there is a way you can put an email address in a DNS record that we are allowed to use and send a validation email to. And it means you could put, pkiteam@domain.com in a DNS record for all of your domains and just have one email get sent there. And that sounds really good, but that's going away. And the constructed emails are the ones where you get to choose admin, administrator, hostmaster, postmaster, webmaster at yourdomain.com. And those are going away too. Now, we do know that there's quite a lot of businesses and perhaps enterprises that rely on these DCV methods because it's just what they've done for many years, as you suggested, Tim, or it just happens to be easier today for them because they haven't put the focus on automating this process with DNS. So it's good that we start to warn people about this now. It's good that we have a couple of years' notice to start to move to better and more automated methods of DCV and get away from, having someone click an email. Because even if these were permitted for a long time, the final deadline for TLS lifetime reduction is actually a year after this, isn't it, Tim? 2029. But at that point, you have to redo this process every 10 days.
Yeah. And
So with
so this
email
is
still being available, you'd have to have somebody click an email link for every single one of your domain names pretty much every
yeah.
week, which is
Yeah,
not
it's
practical.
weekly. Again, if we talk about yearly, every 6 months, every 3 months, every month. Also, it's every week for domain control validation. Yeah, all this is right. I mean, the I think you said it well, and we can let this go. I'm just going to try to make one point, which is when changes like this come about, especially deprecation of capabilities that literally have been in place for decades. One of the things that you and I can have consistently seen, Nick, is that
Mhm.
large enterprises, which are complex, don't always know exactly how they are using those methods. We saw this with root expirations. We saw this with deprecation of other capabilities like mutual TLS, where you'll talk to somebody, people in charge of certificates, and they'll say, oh, it's okay. We don't do that. And then when the functionality shuts off, suddenly they have a crisis because it turns out they actually do that. So I want to encourage everyone on this not to just kind of shrug and say, that's okay, that's not us. For the email based DCV in particular, it is a common practice. And it won't be all of your domains, it'll just be some of them. And so go in here with your eyes open to the idea that your organization might be doing this. Your organization might be doing this, and you might not even realize it. And you've got 2 years, like Nick said, it's a lot of time, but 2 years from now, we don't want any of you on this call to be having a problem because this didn't get dealt with. So we recommend go make a project this year. Figure out if this is happening inside your organization. And if it is, give yourself a task to phase it out.
Absolutely. It's another one of the things another one of the changes that's happening. I think one of the overarching things that I think we both talk about, Tim, before we get into the
Yeah.
final stuff and the deluge of questions is that there are a lot of changes happening in this industry. They are coming thick and fast, and I think as you and I both reiterate to any customers and prospects, and anytime we talk like this, these changes are gonna keep coming thick and fast. Right?
Yeah.
It's not going to let up. There's going to be more changes, and it is just going to force people to look at this more and understand more, as you say, assess what they have, assess what they're doing, and be more agile and be more flexible. And the key to all of this is automation, but I don't want people to think that this is the last batch of changes and we get to 2028 and everything, gets easier again. More of these changes are going to happen. So more changes to how we issue certificates and how you use them are going to come. So we want everybody to be prepared. We'll do our best to make sure everybody's informed. And we will also, of course, produce solutions and products and things that will help people through them.
Yep.
But I think our job first, Tim, is to make sure everybody is informed that what these
Yep.
changes are
Yep.
and when they're happening.
Correct. And with our advice for how to deal with them, obviously. So, if you did like this conversation, I want to encourage you. I am the co host of the Root Causes podcast, a PKI and security podcast. We have new episodes every week. I put one up yesterday. And we talk about all kinds of things: digital certificates, PKI, encryption, post quantum cryptography, digital identity, and related topics. So come join my associate Jason and me as we dive deep in all of these topics. And with that, I think we are ready for questions.
Yes, and we had a lot of fantastic questions, so we'll
Good.
try to go through all of them.
Okay.
The first one was, I got marketing emails from Sectigo saying 200-day lifespans are happening on March 12th, and the webinar says March 15th. Which one is it?
Yes.
Yeah, we've given like whole webinars just on this topic. The March 15 is the final deadline. What we wanted to do was, but that's a Sunday. So what we really didn't want was people to walk in on Monday morning, sit at their desks, and it turns out that the way they're used to doing things has stopped working over the weekend. So, in order to give everyone a chance to adjust, we moved it up to the Thursday before that deadline, which is March 12th, which gives everybody a full workday that Friday to make sure everything's working correctly and deal with anything you see that is not as expected. And this is a best practice. We've learned this again the hard way. It's the same thing as me saying that people think they're unaffected, but it turns out they're affected. Likewise, we've learned through experience that giving all of the users, the subscribers, a little bit of time to deal with things rather than like surprising them on a weekend just makes it run smoother across the board for the entirety of our user base.
Great. The next question is, we have around 300 public trusted SSL certificates. How long do you think will it take to automate this lifecycle process?
Well, that's a good question. I think the honest answer is it is going to vary. I apologize for being vague in that answer. It's really going to vary. I mean, there are a lot of automation technologies and tools out there. We have a lot of them. It really depends on what you are doing with those 300 certificates, right? So if those are 300 that are all, say, on fairly standard web servers, something like Nginx or Apache or a Java-based web server, then there's a lot of well-tested even open source and other tools out there, an Acme client or something that could very easily automate that and do it very, very quickly. If those 300 are dotted around 300 individual systems and some of which are so old and legacy they don't even talk to the internet, it's obviously going to take you a bit longer. I mean, I think in a general sense, 300 certificates is more than manageable with automation. But the honest answer to the question is it really depends on what those 300 certificates are being used for and on what kind of systems they sit.
Great. And I'm going to skip to one question that's come up a lot at the end because it kind of goes with it. It is around, what advice can you give regarding automation? What automation is out there that can support us?
Yes. So in a general sense, there's a lot of options, right? So there's two things that we need to automate as well. One is actually the certificates themselves and requesting new ones and installing new certificates. And there's obviously the DCV automation that we've talked about. And those two components can be automated together. So for the DCV automation, the domain control validation automation, there's a couple of options. One of them that we certainly offer is something we have called a DNS connector, or like a DNS agent. And it's a piece of software that you run and you will plug in your details with your DNS provider. And we support various DNS providers and we are expanding that list all the time. And that solution will periodically connect to your DNS provider, talk to Sectigo, and create the necessary records to verify your domain automatically, periodically in the background for you. So that will automate that process. In terms of automating the certificates, there are a lot more options. And again, like the previous question, it very much depends on what you are doing with the certificates. We have APIs in our system, which will allow you to code your own scripts and systems and talk into your existing systems. We have integrations into different platforms, whether it's systems like ServiceNow, whether it's cloud providers like Azure and Microsoft and AWS, and you can automate your certificates there. We, of course, also have support for protocols like Acme, which is the de facto standard, really, for automating the automated provisioning of TLS certificates, and that will do some of the domain validation as well. And then finally, we have options like we call agents or network agents. These are pieces of software that, again, you install within your infrastructure on the servers themselves or on a machine that can talk to those servers, and it will handle the automation. It will communicate to these servers. It will generate new keys, generate new requests, get them from Sectigo and get them validated and install them for you. So there are actually myriad automation options available. You can use all of them. You can try and standardize on one like Acme, but it's really, you'll need to speak to somebody that we have ideally so that we can help guide you to the right solution for your particular infrastructure. But I will say, there aren't really many places where we cannot automate. And as I said earlier, if there are systems where automation is really difficult to impossible, then we can help evaluate with you whether that is actually a target for having a certificate that needs automation and whether there's an alternative like a private CA or something else instead. Forgive the long-winded answer.
Thank you, Nick. Client authentication EKU will be removed as well. How can we handle applications which rely on MTLS and need a publicly trusted client certificate?
Yes, so that's another change we didn't really talk about in this particular webinar, but there's another deadline coming up soon where server certificates, the ones we're primarily talking about, TLS, have historically been able to include something called client authentication EKU, which allows them to be able to identify themselves back to a server. And that is going away. That's not going to be allowed in the future. The honest answer is if you are using certificates for client authentication, so for client auth, for MTLS, for server authentication, they should not be from a publicly trusted CA. They should be from a private CA. You are using them as an authentication token, so you yourself should be issuing them from a private CA. We know there are a lot of systems out there that say they need them from a public CA. They only do that out of laziness and convenience, unfortunately. And it's just something that has functioned for the past 10, 15, 20 years, but it is technically unnecessary. And in fact, it's a security risk to do so. So anytime you are using certificates with client auth for MTLS or server-to-server authentication, they should either be moved to a private CA or they should use an alternative technology to certificates altogether, because it's dangerous and there is no need to have them from a public CA.
What can we expect in terms of validation steps for manual renewal? Will there be any changes in terms of validation methods, considering the increased frequency, in brackets, until we automate?
Yeah, so between now and the deprecations that we discussed, there is nothing ballot-wise forcing changes in how that is done. And I consider deeply unlikely that such a thing would occur, because instead of doing that, what we're going to do is simply deprecate them. So I very much expect that those methods will stay the same as long as they last. Now, again, we don't do the phone-based stuff anyway. So for us, it really means there's 2 years during which email-based DCV will occur, and it will occur basically the way it is now. Again, there's nothing on the horizon suggesting that changes. However, March 15, 2028 is a hard deadline, and at that point, it's just plain done for us and everyone. So the real thing is to focus on to getting other methods in place where you're not doing that anymore.
Thank you. For MTLS used in the IoT, how are we supposed to manage devices that can't support automated certificate renewals?
Yeah, I think that's a fairly easy one, much like my previous answer on MTLS. So for mutual TLS, you do not need publicly trusted certificates. Again, it's a security risk. It's a bad idea. I appreciate it's been easy for a lot of people to use for a long time, but there is nothing but risk to doing that there. And so those certificates should be moved to a private CA, which gives you kind of two benefits. One is it should be automated anyway, because these are IoT devices. They should have the ability to update. They should have certificates included in the firmware or the software, and they're updated. But also, because it's a private CA, it's completely out of scope for these reductions in lifetime that we're talking about. And so you're free to kind of have them issued for longer, or to manage them in a different way. But that's one of the reasons why you want to take mutual TLS out of the public CA space and into something private, where you're not necessarily subject to these changes, and you can do things other than automate if you need to.
Which time zone would SSL certificates expire in?
The time zone is encoded into it, so it's generally UTC, I think, for most CAs.
That's what we do.
But that's what we do. But it can be adjusted, but it's generally UTC.
And can Sectigo discover certificates not issued by Sectigo, so we can work on migrating them over?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. In our SCM, our Sectigo Certificate Manager platform, we have a lot of discovery capabilities, but we will pick up any certificate issued by us, issued by another CA, self-signed, private CA, anything we can see that is a certificate that is being served, we can find, we can discover, and we can let you, inventory and manage, and then help with the migration. Absolutely.
Is DNSSEC worth it, or is secure DNS enough security?
I think a lot of that depends on who you ask. If you were to ask me, I would say no. DNSSEC is not worth it. One of the things and I know there's a lot of other more knowledgeable commenters out there on DNSSEC than I, but I think a telling thing for me is that a lot of the big properties on the internet, don't use it.
Yeah.
Right? Google themselves don't use DNSSEC. Google's own CA doesn't use DNSSEC. I mean, we respect it in the same way that we do, and Tim and I have talked about with validation, but in terms of their organization using it, they don't. A lot of big technical organizations don't use it. It has a lot of problems with it, a lot of legacy problems and encryption problems. And as we've mentioned, it's fairly hard to manage and set up and configure correctly all the time. There's a significantly high risk of outage. So I would personally say it's not worth it. Your security teams may disagree, but I would advise speaking to your own security teams or your own DNS people and seeing what they think about it.
What if your DNS provider is not on Sectigo's list of supported DNS providers, for example, Ultra DNS?
Yeah, I think the first thing to do would be to get in touch with your account manager, even our support team, and log a request to have it added. Our DNS connector is designed to be, extensible on our side. We are adding new providers. We add them in terms of, popularity and also popularity within our existing customer base. But things like Ultra DNS,
we're customer driven. So, we're building, we're prioritizing the thing that the customers are indicating they want. So vote and it'll help your thing get prioritized.
It may be on the roadmap already with Ultra DNS today, but if you check with your account manager or a support ticket, they'll let you know more accurately than I can. But I'm pretty sure that's one of the ones that should be coming up very soon in the roadmap.
Thanks. Is a single DCV method not creating a big risk in the internet? What if suddenly there's a compromise for automated DCV?
Well, there isn't a single DCV method. So automated DCV isn't one single homogeneous approach. There are a bunch of different approaches. You might be using it with Acme. You might be using file-based DCV or DNS-based DCV. There are a lot of ways you can do it. What's consistent across them is they're all automated, as opposed to things like phone calls and email, which are not.
I think one thing I'll add to that though, Tim, is pretty much all methods come down to DNS. Because DNS names are what we actually validate and what we sign into a certificate. It's what your browser uses to compare in the address bar in the certificate and use DNS to look up. So everything ultimately centers down on DNS. That's the method that's really going to be the main one going forward. While there are others, it is going to be centered around DNS. And I would say if there is some kind of global problem with DNS, and we've seen issues before, then it does cause problems, but it causes problems with everything. If DNS itself is somehow completely broken, then, quite honestly, CAs are
just
not
gotta
top
stop
of the
using
list
the internet until that gets fixed. Yes, correct.
Yeah, if DNS breaks that badly and is that vulnerable, then I'm certainly going to go and live in a cave, and I would probably advise everybody else to do the same.
Are we able to get one-year certificates before 12th of March, 2026?
Yeah,
Yes.
That's what we have now. Yes, that will be good. Up through March 12, we are offering the same maximum term that you've been used to for the last, 5 or so years.
Yeah. And those certificates will continue to live out their lifetime. They are not going to be truncated or revoked after the date in the middle of March. However, what I will say is, if you get a one-year certificate today and you reissue it tomorrow, you can still have the rest of your 1 year. If you reissue it on March the 14th for Sectigo, you will only get 199 days. You'll then have to reissue again to get the last few days on your 1 year purchase that you have. So while a 1 year certificate issued today will live out its lifetime if you do nothing with it but use it, if you reissue that certificate or you have to purchase a new one after the March date, you will be capped at 199 days.
Thank you. And then someone says we have 2 single domain TLS certificates. Are these changes applying to all TLS certificates?
Yes.
Yes, all publicly trusted TLS certificates. So that's any that's issued by, Sectigo or LE or anybody else, any publicly trusted CA that has certificates that work in everyone's browser and phone and laptop, all of those are impacted. There's no opt-outs. There's no place to say, I can get this because I'm not using it for a website or it's only for an internal system. Anything that is issued by a publicly trusted CA is subject to these changes and these new regulations.
Thank you. Why should a code signing certificate have a different maximum lifespan than a regular TLS certificate if the goal is to reduce risk from compromised keys?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is it is, while it's still a certificate, it's fundamentally a different type of certificate doing a different job, right? So a TLS certificate is used ostensibly for HTTPS, for websites and secure web traffic.
Yeah.
And that is potentially used, millions of times a second and is used very live. Code signing is used to sign software, right? And it's used to guarantee a package of software has a certain amount of integrity. When you download it from the internet, that signature is checked to make sure that it's not been tampered in between. They are fundamentally different things.
Yeah.
Also, as we've mentioned, the code signing certificates have to be issued in pieces of hardware. They can't simply be reissued instantly necessarily,
All,
like with an Acme client and things. So that does.
all,
Sorry, go ahead,
all
Tim.
security is a trade-off between safety and usability. That's continually what you're doing is you're deciding where you sit on the spectrum. And based on the different use cases, you make an argument to sit in a different spot, right? And so by the fact that code signing is being used in a very different way, by the fact that code signing certs must be distributed on hardware, that makes the usability aspect of things considerably worse. And when we make the security trade-off spot, it sits at the little over a year mark rather than the 6 months, 3 months, 1 month mark. That's basically the reason.
Thank you. Then we had a couple of questions all around pricing. One, for example, is what happens to subscriptions of those purchased for a year? How will pricing work going forward?
We will still offer subscriptions just as we do now, and those subscriptions will be available in year increments just as they are now. Just you're going to get certs. You're going to get your new cert more often. So this isn't fundamentally different from if you went and got, let's say, a 3-year subscription for a cert from us today, which you could do. Then what happens is every year you get issued your new certificate. Same thing is going to happen, but the increment of issuance will go up. But other than that, it's not really going to be materially different. And likewise, I don't think we haven't really announced, and I'm not expecting any pricing changes to our certificates to our subscriptions of those durations.
Yeah, and we've done this before. That's the one thing to note, and I tell people a lot is we've seen, as we usually do in our slides, we've seen the lifetime of certificates reduce and the cost of a given year of certificate coverage, if you like, a given subscription hasn't gone up substantially. People think,
Yeah.
oh, I'm going down to the 6-month certificate. Am I going to pay double? I'm going down to 3 months. Am I going to pay 4 times as much?
Aha,
It
you're
hasn't worked
taking me
that
to
way.
monthly renewals. I'm going to have to pay
Yeah.
12 times as much. No,
No.
not the case. Correct.
Great. I think we definitely have time for 1 or 2 more questions. If shorter is better, why not 14-day lifespans or 7, 3, 1 day, or
Yeah.
even a couple of hours?
Because it's
Where's
that
the line?
trade-off, right? It's that trade-off we talked about. And another thing to think about is as you get to these pretty short time frames, the marginal improvement to safety by making it even shorter continues to decrease. So when we went from 3 years to 1 year, we took 2 years off it, right? When you go from 1 year to 6 months, you take 6 months off it. 6 months to 3 months, you take 3 months off it, right? It's kind of a Zeno's paradox thing where the closer you get to zero, as you asymptotically approach zero, the amount of benefit you get keeps cutting smaller and smaller and smaller. So somewhere along the line, you hit that benefit to reward that or that inconvenience to reward the usability versus security spectrum that I talked about before, where you find that spot and you say, we think we're there. The current plan only goes down to monthly cadence of certificate renewals for public TLS. That probably won't be where technology sits for the remainder of human history, but that's the event horizon that we have right now.
Yep.
And
I think I've said as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tim, go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
I was going to say, I don't think that 47 days, 1 month is kind of the end goal, right? I mean, that's what, as you said, Tim, that's what's been written in the guidelines. That's where we are today and what we're aiming for. I strongly suspect by the time we get there, most people, hopefully, and most systems will be automated, right? So moving down from 47 to 14 is unlikely to be a big challenge whatsoever. One final comment I will add, having spoken to a lot of people on this previously, is People do ask, why not hours? Why not one day? I think one of the problems in going solo is that there is something called clock skew. And there's an awful lot of people's systems and phones and laptops and things whose clocks might be off by hours, maybe even a couple of
Hours, yeah.
days. And so if you've got a certificate that's only valid for a day and you've got a small percentage of people whose clocks are off by that much, you've got a big problem. So again, it's like Tim said, it's the trade-off thing, right? We want it as short as possible without negatively impacting people unnecessarily. But also once we get to the last goal we have written down for ourselves at 47, it should be pretty easier to go lower and even back up if we need to. So I think once we get to 47 days, we'll see. We'll probably end up lower, although I don't suspect we'll go much lower than probably 7 to 10 days would be my guess as a minimum.
Thank you so much, and right at the hour as well. I know we haven't been able to answer every single question. Any outstanding ones,
But
we'll
we
get
did a
back to
lot.
you. Thank you everyone for your time, and thanks Nick and Tim. If you have any more questions, do get in touch. And finally, I wanted to invite you to the shorter TLS series starting in March, a series of webinars around the 199-day lifespan reduction. We'd love to see you there. But for now, thank you and have a good rest of your day.